Welcome to the rerun of Brewtanix with Bechtle, Lenovo and Nutanix. This is a slightly changed recording from the original because we no longer have the beer tasting at the end of that, but that doesn't make the content any less valid, so please enjoy. We're going to start talking a little bit about who Bechtle are and then move on to the Lenovo Nutanix platform specifically, and a little bit around HCI and what Nutanix brings to the table. And then we're going to take you through really how that works seamlessly in AWS and Azure. On the panel today, we've got myself, John Moore. I'm a hybrid infrastructure consultant at Bechtle. Grant Friend, who's a cloud architect with Nutanix, and Mark Sprosen from Lenovo, who's their software-defined lead and looks after all of the software-defined platforms, Nutanix being one of them. A quick introduction to Bechtle for those of you that don't know much about us. We're Europe's largest IT reseller in Europe. We cover 14 different countries and pretty much cover the whole gamut of IT sales, as you can see in front of you. We also have the ability to wrap all of those in with a fully encompassed service and have a great reach into lots of different product lines. I sit under the hybrid infrastructure pillar, and I think it's probably worth putting that into perspective in terms of our partnerships with Lenovo and Nutanix. With Lenovo, we're one of the most heavily certified partners in the data center space. We're one of only 4 resellers in Lenovo's Better Together program. And to give you an idea of kind of size of business, we've grown our Lenovo data center business in EMEA over the last 18 months from £2 million to nearly 10 million. So there's a lot of growth in that particular area for the business. In terms of Nutanix, all of our storage and server pre-sales guys within the hybrid infrastructure pillar hold technical certification in Nutanix. Bechtle is accredited to the level of Nutanix Cloud Professional, and in Germany, as part of the larger group, we're certified at the highest level, Cloud Champion, which kind of gives you the highest levels of support and delivery. And if I was going to sum up the relationship between those all of those companies in one bound, Bechtle, largest IT reseller in Europe. Lenovo have the most reliable x86 platform in the world, and Nutanix are now recognized for the 3rd year running as the market leader by both Gartner and Forrester. So I'll hand over now to Mark Sprosen to take us through Lenovo and a little bit more about what HCI and Nutanix means.
Very much indeed, John. Hopefully everybody can now see the screen that says Lenovo Nutanix platform. So I'm going to start by playing a short video, and the reason for that is to first of all to keep you awake between now and the beer, also to give you that understanding of the depth that Lenovo can cover from a market perspective. So I will hopefully play this, and you'll hear a bit of sound. As I say, the reason I showed you that video is really to demonstrate the breadth of coverage that we have across the marketplace. the fact that pretty much every single one of those images that you've just seen is serving a different type of customer. And indeed, the idea that we are working with crop growing organizations to develop, the development of improve crop systems, the ability to identify a disease within a given eye retina, the idea that we can improve the performance of a wind farm by looking at the external items within the influence of that environment, all managed and developed and managed by Lenovo hardware technologies and software that we work with in the marketplace. So just a little bit more detail on the Lenovo conversation, the Lenovo story, but why Lenovo is kind of one of those big questions that organizations will ask. And if I step through the obligatory numbers, forgive me, but as an organization, Lenovo is basically a $50 billion business with just under 60,000 employees. As you may well know, we're number one in the marketplace for PC vendors, covering around about just over 24% of that marketplace. And we very much, are looking to take that relation, that strength in our marketplace, and be able to replicate that in our data center business. We're doing that through investment. We're doing that through development. And one of the key things that we're very proud of, and I'll pick on it, it will come up on the next slide, but is our ability to deliver. We have 33 manufacturing facilities globally, 6 of which are dedicated to the data center group business. So we have a very good capability to be able to deliver upon the promises that we present to our customers. And just kind of stepping into perhaps some more detailed numbers, but I touched upon that Gartner supply chain, or that our ability to supply. We, as it says there, is number 15 in the world in terms of our Gartner supply chain, and we stand beside and next to Diageo and Coca-Cola. So as a business, being able to supply to the same type of standards that you can see from fast-moving consumer goods, then we're very, very happy with that capability. But looking at richer capabilities, there we are number one in terms of delivery for SAP HANA. So SAP have chosen Lenovo as their data center provider, and indeed we're now going back to the market with a consumption-based model around the use of that technology. The fact that we can deliver a higher performance capability in SQL 2017 than any other technology provider is something that Microsoft have endorsed us with. And just on that, let me touch upon the next piece, which is talking about our reliability. Reliability is key for us, in as much as ensuring that, and the numbers here bear reference, that the independent organization ITIC, who have reviewed this for many years, and indeed we've recovered now for the last 7 years where we have been number one. And what this graph is presenting is downtime exceeding 4 hours. We have, as a percentage of our systems, and we've got over 20 million servers out there in the marketplace, we've had less than 2 minutes per server per annum of unplanned downtime, and that's roughly 1%. Now, if you look at the competitors, it says they're 4, 9, and 14 times less reliable than Lenovo, and that's important when we're talking about organizations and their business environments. When you look at the other side of the coin and look at performance, Lenovo hold 195 world records for performance at the moment in time, and that will increase. But we have over 1/3 of the marketplace of the supercomputers. And as you can see in the center of the graphic there, it's not just in one particular geographical marketplace. It's across swathes of both, the Asia and Europe and the Americas in terms of its capability to fight in that piece. And it isn't that these are separate and discrete technologies. This is essentially the building blocks upon which we build all of our systems. The graphic behind you see it's a system in Barcelona that is used to collect and identify, using artificial intelligence, the retina scans of patients to identify whether or not there is a disease in that retina, and to pick it up earlier and more efficiently than individual optometrists can do so. So we're very happy, very proud with our capability to deliver and our capability to be able to perform. But from a perspective of what is it that Lenovo brings to the marketplace, it isn't just our technology stack. It's our relationships. And obviously I'm here to talk specifically about that relationship with Nutanix today. But moving towards the story that we have with our customers, and indeed yourselves, is about transforming that data center, that conversation about path to the cloud. Sure, it's been mentioned many times before in terms of, you know, whether or not you cloud first, cloud always, or in some instances, cloud never. But I guess the question really relates to, if we take that point, what indeed are we talking about as cloud? So, you know, the idea of an organization wanting to have a cloud-like consumption and delivery model is being able to take on demand, or even, you know, to take that step further to subscription. You know, we're all using Google OneDrive or you know, the iCloud capabilities with your phones to be able to store photographs. That's the type of situation that organizations would aspire to be able to achieve, to be able to flex up and flex down depending upon particular requirements that an organization needs or sectors within it. But what cloud is not a specific place. It isn't your data center or your partner's data center or a colo. That is simply just where the physical equipment resides. It is definitely a way of how you're consuming and how you're going to use that infrastructure. Having said that, what is critical, or what proves to be critical with customers, is how they can get close to that cloud environment. And things such as, or technologies such as virtualization and indeed hyper-converged architecture, hyper-converged infrastructure are absolutely foundational to be able to get an organization toward that cloud experience. They are not in of themselves cloud. They definitely are deliver that experience. But if just taking that HCI conversation a little bit further, when Lenovo are talking to our customers and to our partners, we are faced with essentially 4 buckets of kind of questions that individuals are trying to challenge or are being challenged with. You know, escalating costs of legacy technology, inefficiency with pools of storage or compute that they can't share across applications. And as organizations evolve and people come and go, the complexities of technologies that were required many years ago sometimes can outgrow that business in terms of their natural understanding. And it drives to ensuring that you can get more out of that investment, and hence the conversation about lack of productivity. And it says there's 71% of challenges that the buyers are looking to address with HCI. Now, there are many more, but these are the core that we tend to be talking to customers about. Now, just kind of spinning it really on its head a little here is the idea of whether or not cloud is appropriate for all environments. And the idea that because of whether or not it's, I mean, we refer to it here as data gravity or different legacy applications that you simply can't take to the cloud, or you're not prepared to put the data in the cloud to have that risk. You don't know based on the application what those costs are going to be. And indeed, there may be some concerns that you cannot physically put, you know, an application or data set within the cloud because of regulatory requirements based on geography. So it's not necessarily that cloud isn't appropriate. It's the question that public cloud may not be the most. And indeed, conversations that we, indeed Nutanix, have had is that there's a significant amount of organizations that are actually repatriating the applications and the data from the cloud and back onto on-premise. But of those, what is it that's precisely being left in the cloud, or what is appropriate for cloud? And it's very much looking at the fact that if you have a predictable environment, even a performance requirement, especially low latency, then it's highly more likely that you're going to get a better service to your customers by having that capability on premise. Not dismissing the desire to be able to flex up and down and to easily move data around, but it's the idea of having elastic capabilities that public cloud deliver, and that's most typical with the applications. If I look again, moreover, at specific applications or in the idea of a particular application, and we take a typical or even traditional IT operation, and we have an individual that says, well, I've got a new application, a new business to bring to the table. In this, it's an e-commerce. It could be It could be a health sector, could be oil and gas, could be anything that is going to drive that new technology requirement. Those individuals pretty much know exactly what they're going to need to be able to deliver that. Whether or not they're serving one instance or one user or 10 users or 10,000 users, they're going to understand how that infrastructure is going to need to scale. And historically, that individual or that group of individuals would have gone and spoken to the silos within the business, to the network team, to the compute team, to the storage team, and said, this is what I need, please go away and make it happen. And presuming they're all available all at the same time and they can all talk to one another without discussing other applications and other projects, they're going to be faced with a significant number of interdependencies regarding the technology choices and protocols that either exists or indeed may need to be brought in-house to be able to make stuff work. But it isn't just the interdependencies. It's here represented here with potentially 50 or 60 different things to consider, to take into play as to how to be able to build that application and to take it out to the marketplace. And it absolutely is complex. It can have a slow delivery capability. And what hyper-converged architecture is there to deliver is to move away those interdependencies, to have built into that system the capability to deliver applications, to deliver workloads at a very, very short order time and in terms of complexity. Looking at it a little bit more granular, on the left-hand side of this graphic here, we've got the typical environment where we've got the three-tier systems: storage, compute, and networking, all separate. Move forward, and perhaps over the last decades or so, we've all been familiar with the EMC, VCE, EMC, Citrix, and VMware capabilities, and even FlexPod from the NetApp system. All very good in terms of having a reference architecture, but still very much requiring highly complex, highly skilled individuals to make sure that it's the right technology delivered, it's robust for scale and for change, and the idea that there are experts in the marketplace to be able to assist. The idea as we move towards a more optimized, a hyper-converged infrastructure environment that allows that very simple step from an on-premise to a hybrid cloud and capability to be able to move back and forth as required. And where you take a HCI technology basis, it is far, far simpler to be able to move towards that transformative cloud capability. Now, from Lenovo's perspective and Nutanix's capabilities, we're not just talking about core IT operations. There is also distributed operations that Lenovo and Nutanix can present and are capable of delivering. Now, Lenovo per se actually are able to deliver not only just core IT and distributed, but also IoT. But that's not for a conversation for today. But the piece that we're here to talk about today is about the Nutanix and the data center transformation capability. But what I want to talk about is actually the Nutanix piece in terms of what their elements are. So I'm going to switch tack and talk now about the Nutanix element. And if you look at Nutanix, they're incredibly pleased, and rightly so, that from a hyper-converged architecture perspective, they're absolutely in the right corner of the market quadrants. In terms of customers, you see in the bottom left here, 18,000 customers now having very much shifted towards a subscription-based model to be able to looking at it on an annual-based cost point, which has helped both themselves and their customers. It's allowed customers to have a very, very good understanding and move towards a more cloud capability system. Looking at the Forrester and the Gartner piece, you can see here top right-hand corner. Now, looking at it, I think the Forrester piece here actually took a leap over the last 3 to 6 months and has stretched their leadership capability over their competitors. And I'm sure they're very, very pleased with that. You'll hear from Grant later on some of that. But what Nutanix is great about is actually being able to deliver their technology across multiple markets. They cover, whether it's public sector, whatever it is, they have customers across that portfolio sector. And they're very happy to be able to demonstrate that with references, with and for in conjunction with Lenovo. So we're very happy to be able to stand beside them and demonstrate our capabilities across the marketplaces. But one thing that I think stands out is on Nutanix, and it bears some repetition here, is that those number of customers. But moreover, the satisfaction rate, the fact that they have such a high satisfaction rate that they have for the last 6 years given a net promoter score of over 90. So, you know, what that means for me is that as a Lenovo individual, we are confident that when we present a Nutanix solution in conjunction with the Lenovo, being the highest performance, the highest reliable platform, with a software stack that's got 97% customer satisfaction and net promoter score of over 90, means that we're going to be satisfied that the system is going to serve the purposes of the customer. Now, just to have a repetition around the Nutanix piece, just echoing my slides earlier, is to look and talk about removing that complexity, to collapse the infrastructure and the time that it takes to manage those systems, to not necessarily have to take a rip and replace technology buying process historically. The idea that multiple nodes can be added and indeed removed is required to be redeployed, to allow the IT specialists to have more time to deliver to the business. A health and a healthcare business should not necessarily be IT specialists. They should be healthcare specialists. So it's about ensuring that the IT team can deliver the processes to the business that provide that better capability. But just to put into pictorial form, this really on the left-hand side is what Nutanix, what hyper-converged infrastructure is about doing. It's about taking highly complex storage area networks, network attached systems with complex connectivity, and collapsing that and delivering it in an x86 platform. And moreover, not just doing it with one, but we're doing it with 3, 4, 5, into many hundreds of nodes to provide a reduction in business continuity. And what I mean by that is you do not have business continuity. You add, the more capability you have of recovering or indeed not creating a failure position. But they have obviously their own virtualization capability. They can work with multiple providers equally. But what Nutanix is about doing is making that infrastructure invisible, removing that pain of delivering virtual machines, of managing capability of the underlying technology, and saying, actually, we're just going to do away with that, and you're simply only going to have to deal with the applications. And whether that's delivering it in a VDI environment or as a service or indeed cloud systems, Nutanix has that capability. And what Nutanix does is it's very, very useful at taking a VDI system. It's incredibly useful at database management, and Grant will talk about some of that in more detail. But it really does simplify that whole stack of managing storage, understanding the network connectivity. Now, the next couple of slides are really about Nutanix. Again, Grant will talk about this in more detail. But what you're looking at is on the underlying system here of the AOS, the AHV, and Prism. Those are the core components of Nutanix that manage the underlying x86 system. As you step further out onto this, as these semicircles, these are capabilities that you can add to Nutanix, whether or not it's as it says here, the Xi-frame in terms of business continuity, whether you've got file system, etc. And this deck will be available to you, so you can review this at later depth. But the point being is what Nutanix give you that choice, that capability to choose what virtualization platform you run on that system, whether it's their own in terms of Nutanix AHV, which I'm reliably informed probably around about 50% of their customers now that are using AHV, but equally their ability to run VMware, Citrix, and Hyper-V on their platform. Now, from a choice perspective, yes, Nutanix provide a greater choice than just Lenovo, but clearly I'm here today to talk about Lenovo, so I'm going to make the other ones quietly disappear. And from a freedom of choice perspective, it's around making sure that Bechtle is your choice here for delivering and capability of using Nutanix. But one final slide from me, which is just about the choice of capability in terms of and that's about how that can be built. in terms of whether or not we're talking about an SMB system, high performance, mission critical, or storage heavy capabilities. And these are all dependent upon, the storage capabilities and the compute recommendation, systems that you need. So that's where I'm going to leave it here today. I'm going to stop there and say thank you very much for taking the time to listen. As I said, the slides will be available, so you can look at those at your leisure. But at this time, I believe I'm going to hand over to Grant.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Mark. It's a very good presentation. I'm well chuffed as well, and you've set the scene very nicely for me, so I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now I've got to share. I love it, even in this day and age, I keep complaining about. You're very familiar with your keyboard. You're very familiar how to use Word and Outlook, but every single one of these presentations, Zoom, Teams, I still struggle to remember which one to turn it on. Anyway, my name's Grant Friend. I'm a cloud architect working in the channel. John's absolutely right as well. Thanks for that, John. That's possibly the least animated I've ever been in any picture. Thanks. But I'm going to talk through hybrid and multi-cloud for the enterprise, and I'm going to at least replay a little bit of what Mark was talking about, because on the left hand side today you've got fabric servers and your sitting on top of it. We do away with all that complexity, simple as that, and Mark showed that too. You've then got rid of all of, well, not necessarily got rid, let me repurpose, but you've got at the moment these people who are specialists working on the storage. They take time to deliver to the business. There was a time when the business was very beholden to IT. They would wait for IT to make a decision, and they would take it on board or fight against it and finally accept it. But now businesses are very much the other way around. IT is beholden to the business. Businesses only go forward if their IT infrastructure is agile, and you don't necessarily get that with that three-tier infrastructure on the left-hand side, because your storage specialist is looking after the storage, making sure it's ticking over. Your network specialist, who also works on the storage fabric, is looking after that. Your server specialist is looking after the servers, and your hypervisor specialist is looking after the hypervisors. And even then, as I run through that, your workloads to your customers, because ultimately your users are your customers in your IT business. It takes time. The business makes a decision. We want this delivered. Well, okay, we're going to make a request for it. I go and get that VM created. Well, I haven't got enough storage. I've got to go speak to the storage specialist. He carves it. I'm too busy at the moment. Come back to me later. I could go on and on and on. You understand where we're coming from here. And all we've got here is a Lenovo platform, an x86 server, ultimately, with our software running on top of it, that brings each of those servers together effectively, as Mark showed, built for effectively any hypervisor. We mentioned there we've got our own hypervisor AH3. It's a no-cost option based on KVM. So for those of you who've been in IT for many years, you're possibly very aware of the KVM hypervisor. Runs on a number of the cloud platforms as well. And all we did, we just took it, made some changes to it, brought some features to it it doesn't necessarily have, things like high availability, hot add of storage and compute on top of it, and other features that you know and like from those other hypervisors, in particular ESXi. We also support ESXi, and it's no two ways about it. It's all about your choice. Not saying get rid of your ESXi environment. If you've got skills and you've got the need to run ESXi, run it on Nutanix. The same for Hyper-V as well. And on top of that, we also have support for, we've got K8s there for Kubernetes and all those other containerized platforms on top of it. Now that ultimately brings the applications and the data closer to the underlying integrated compute storage, and therefore gives you the best possible performance for it. Now I think at this point, it is worth showing you, because Mark spoke about it really early on. He was talking about the cloud, and he said about doesn't get you to the cloud, but it can give you some of the agility that the cloud delivers. And if you have looked at or run some workloads on the cloud, you'll know you literally log onto your AWS account, go ahead, deploy that particular VM, get your workload on it, and happy days, the business is running. Or when the business comes to you and says, we need this, and you go, that's going to be 5 days before we get you that VM and we can get that workload installed on it, the business goes to the cloud. It's that shadow IT we all used to know of about 10, 15 years ago, people bringing in their own laptops, but now it's different. They're taking the data out of the business and putting it on a cloud provider. And similarly, with the cloud infrastructure, it has its benefits, but you need to be able to architect it properly, or rather, you need to be able to secure it properly as well. You may have seen the other week that AWS had a bit of an outage, and therefore a number of websites and businesses were affected. That wasn't AWS's fault. You could argue, okay, AWS shouldn't have an outage, but that wasn't their fault that businesses were down. It was those businesses' fault for not understanding on the cloud platform. It is, again, as Mark kind of pointed out, someone else's data center. And you guys know with your data centers that you have the resiliency in that data center over to another data center that isn't in the same borough or same city or same town. And that's the same with the cloud. If I deploy a workload on the cloud, I need to deploy it in multiple data centers. Now, as I've laboured on a bit of the pain around there, I did say at that point, it is worth at least showing you exactly what Nutanix brings, what it offers. Because Mark, again, went through that point, and I laboured on it a little bit as well. You've got these different administrators that run the business and keep the lights on, come in on a Monday morning, do a bit of firefighting, and then carry on with their week, when really they should be looking at how to take the business further forward and what to do with the IT infrastructure. And this is, as we call it, the Prism management interface. We've got it up here on the left-hand side. And just very quickly, this runs on some HX hardware. We'll have a look at that in a second. But even as I go through this drop down, you can see all the different entities that are managed within this particular environment. Okay. Now, even if I stop there, your current environment, you could argue, Grant, it's going to have one management interface for a couple of those components, but you are going to have a management interface for your storage, a management interface for your servers, a management interface for your virtualization, and all the other components that I've got there as well. And even as I say that, just labouring on the home page here, you can see we've got some key metrics around this particular platform just from the home page, even down to the health component there. Just a whistle-stop tour, though, of what is possible here, because it's not just about the manageability of the platform that we bring here. We also have this ability to really get some great analytics from the platform as well, because that's not always as easy to get, or rather isn't always built into a management interface across there. Now, as I say, this is running Lenovo HX servers, and if I go to a diagram view, it gives you a bit of color to what Mark was talking about previously. This is the cluster itself. In fact, this is just a 2U appliance sitting in a rack, got three nodes, inside of it. So blade servers, you could say. Each of those has some disks inside of it. And in turn, the Nutanix software brings all those disks together into a cluster. Okay, so it's a storage fabric really across there. From this point, I've got the performance summary of the cluster. Really quickly, if I dive onto a host, I get some great information around the host details, as well as the performance of it. Even as I look there, we can even see how well the NICs are performing. Really quickly, to think about if the business calls up the operations team and goes, we've got a problem, something's not performing, Nutanix Prism interface gives them the tools at their disposal to very quickly go and see where is that problem. Was it on the hypervisor host? Is it on one of the disks? How well are these performing? And even, as I say there, because I don't want to spend too long on a demonstration, because there's tools at your disposal, and reach out to Bechtle as well if you need a further demonstration of it as well. But even then, if I go to the VM level side of things and try and find, let's include actually our software on here, because at least I'll find a VM that's churning through a few bits and pieces. But now if I try and find one of these, actually let's go on CPU usage. But now when I look at this particular VM itself, and I know it's, as I say, it's where our software sits, but at least it labours on the point as well. I've got the analytics back around this particular VM. And to my point there, if it was a network problem, what's going on the NICs of this VM? I saw that there were no problems on the physical NIC of the server. Well, what about the NICs themselves? It doesn't seem to be dropping any packets. Now it's my time to dive onto that particular VM and work out from the workload. There is, as I say, a lot more to this, but let's really bring the focus back to what I was going to talk around here as well. So we've looked at that hyper-converged piece, the management interface across there. But then there is worth talking about some of the points that Mark made as well, because the public cloud does have its benefits. Some of you may be sitting here going, Grant, we're not going to the public cloud. It comes up occasionally and we don't really see the benefit of it. And some of you may be going, we're going all in on the cloud. It's the right place for all of our workloads. Well, yeah, to a degree it possibly could be. And again, Mark pointed out it's pretty good for workloads. But to be fair, when you've got predictable workloads on your platform, stuff that remains relatively static, may grow in a little way around the compute it uses and the storage, but in those instances, the public cloud's possibly not right. The public cloud have always, if you've been to any Google seminar or AWS seminar, they've said this for years, and people seem to miss out on the last part of what they say. They go, public cloud is cost effective because you spin up your workloads, you run your computations, and you spin them down. And people seem to forget that second bit. So when people migrate to the cloud and start to leave it running 24/7, it's not necessarily that cost effective. Now, as I say, let's stop focusing on some of the detractors and the benefits of the public cloud. There is that rapid time to market, that ability to deploy in minutes. Ultimately, if your business or your operations team understand what's possible with the public cloud, they can do fractional IT consumption. Just spin it up today, spin it down tonight, run it, the script that powers it on when I need it. But you need to, though, still really have the skills in that public cloud. It's continuously innovating. Again, we don't get an email or an update on our phone going, hey, there's going to be an outage on Azure tonight. You're not going to be able to get to your Office 365. Is that okay with you? No. Continuously innovating, continually updating their software, continually expanding their data centers. And as I think about that, actually, one thing I was going to say as well, hyper-converged is born from those data centers, those web-scale data centers, racks and racks and racks of x86 servers where there is no separate storage and a storage fabric. It is literally just racks of servers. Where if one fails, they pull it out and throw a new one in. Hyper-converged is exactly the same as that. And then ultimately, yeah, that one-click simplicity that comes from it. I demonstrated some of that from what we see within the Prism management interface, and that goes back to a point Mark was making as well. There's features within the hyper-converged, in particular Nutanix, that have that agility, that ability as well, much like the public cloud. In turn, private clouds have their benefits as well. Great for legacy applications. Okay, good point around that. You more than likely have got an old 2003 server running in infrastructure with business critical application that nobody should touch, and you're never going to get that to the public cloud because that operating system not supported on the public cloud, and you're not going to re-platform it either. Therefore, it's going to have to stay in your data center. Good for those, as we say, those enterprise applications because of the predictable costs that are involved in those as well. Definitely more control and security. Okay, and I gave you some examples around that as well because you know who's going into that data center, as well as the fact when it comes to data sovereignty, I'm not going to do it again. I know it sits within my country basically, and yeah, regulatory concerns around that as well. Can't host outside that or in the org geography as well. So with that, there is really a bit of a new normal. Okay, not the new normal we've all been talking about for the last 6 or 7 months or so, but the new normal truly hybrid cloud infrastructure, because both of those, private and public, have their benefits. So they're enticing and they're useful for the business. But there's also a construct now where, should I put everything on Azure? Microsoft came to me and gave me a good price for it, so why shouldn't I? Yeah, but did you ever look at AWS? Because potentially AWS having a bit of a fire sale on. GCP at the moment, Google really want to grow that cloud platform. They're lagging behind the other two. They're doing a fire sale themselves. So there is a construct now that really one cloud infrastructure, one public cloud infrastructure is not the one public cloud infrastructure to go for. You may end up with 3 or 4 or more around there. And then on top of that, well, what have you got? You've got an operations team who are consistently looking after your core data center, your on-premises solution, and now they've got to have skills and the ability to know how to do the work in each one of those cloud providers. Okay, so that brings all its complexity around operations, plus the networking for each of these to talk to each other. Siloed infrastructure management around it as well, because you've got specialists doing specialist jobs when really do you need these people to be specialists, really trying to just keep the lights on and wire that light up and make sure it works. And ultimately, you can't prevent cost overruns around there, because when I spin something up on a public cloud and then I go and have a coffee break and come back and forget what I was doing, well, there's not the consistent cost that comes from it running on my on-premises infrastructure, because that I've already paid for. We've already got that running. This time when I walked off and completely forgot about it and then left it running for days, the business pays for it. What Nutanix have got to help bridge that gap really is Nutanix clusters. Okay, so we have clusters themselves running on premises, but clusters, this is running on the public cloud. So giving you the same consistency, same management interface that you see on your on-premises infrastructure, but on AWS as well. Running on bare metal instances, so effectively AWS becomes another hardware provider for us, but then really giving you, therefore, a hybrid and multi-cloud architecture spanning those different cloud providers, and then reducing that complexity from the operations as well as any complexity from the networking side of things. As I mentioned, yeah, that's running on AWS itself, and the benefits of, or rather, let me replay this a little bit backwards. The benefits of the cloud platform are the services that run underneath it. The S3 buckets, the load balancing, the archiving, the hibernation features on top of it. And we don't change any of that. We've given you a unified interface running on top of it that gives you then that ability to use your data protection, migrate to and from it, move your workloads around, but in turn, still be able to leverage the underlying AWS services if that is desirable to you. There is that native integration that goes on with the networking. Effectively, although it says no networking overlay to add complexity, we are doing a slight bit of overlay, but not something that you need to configure. Pretty much, I just define the subnet on that VPC, my VPC, or sorry, your VPC, AWS's VPC, but either way, Nutanix don't own it, it's yours. And then underneath that, as we say, that direct access to all those other AWS services. Migrate without any performance compromise. You get fantastic performance from the Nutanix platform running on the Lenovo HX hardware, but in turn you'll get that same performance because of the way that we handle writing of data across the platform across both of those infrastructures. And if you want more information on that, again, reach out to Bechtle after this and we can get that set up. And as I said earlier, yeah, it's your Nutanix software running in your AWS VPC, okay? We don't own any of this. Mark went through how Nutanix has a subscription model for its software, and as you possibly know as well, AWS has a subscription model around it as well. And the two work hand in hand. Really back to that point too, I said potentially public cloud has its detractors because you've got things running 24/7. Well, totally, with Nutanix running on there, you can power stuff down and then repurpose your licensing to other parts of your Nutanix infrastructure as it will be. Now, if you're sitting there wondering, well, sounds all well and good, but what are the use cases across this? It sounds pretty niche. Well, just to give you some bit of food for thought, here are some use cases, which pretty much covers any use case. But ultimately, yeah, it could be a lift and shift. You want to get to that cloud platform, but again, you don't want to repurpose, or you can't repurpose, or you haven't understood what it takes to repurpose your VMs to run on that cloud platform. It's not a simple case of just lift and shift, and therefore I expect it to take from my existing hypervisor environment, running that legacy OS with that in-house written application that only a few people know, and therefore get it to work on that AWS environment. So therefore, with that Nutanix piece, it allows you to do that seamless migration to it. That on-demand elasticity as well, yeah, great example of, again, of the cloud, and it's a great use case for it. And seasonal workloads, as they spin up, we take on more people and within the business. When we can't get the hardware into the data center quick enough, we don't have the footprint, go and do that on the cloud provider using Nutanix. We mentioned about the cloud native services because we really want to leverage those features underneath it. So we give you that ability as well. And even business continuity. Some of you may be sitting there just with one data center and you've got backups of your infrastructure, which is great. But when that data center, if that data center rather falls over and you lose access to it, how are you going to recover from it? And some of you, small businesses generally don't have that thought around it. It's fine, we'll make do with it. We're not big enough. We don't have to have a secondary data center because it's expensive, isn't it? Keeping that secondary data center up and running, lights on, but hardly ever used because we don't have that failover. Can be detracting. In those cases, Nutanix on AWS for that business continuity. Therefore, I push my data up onto Nutanix on AWS, hibernate that environment, and therefore I can then bring it up as and when I need it. And the last two around there, VDI on the cloud. Yeah, VDI at the moment, I mean, it's always been the year of VDI, but if you've looked at virtual desktop infrastructures, it's a good opportunity to run it on the cloud providers. And I think we are getting to a point now where VDI is going to be very much like Office 365. If you remember 10 years ago, everybody had Exchange environments. And then Microsoft walked in and said, we'll be your Exchange environment. You don't need an Exchange administrator for that. Why all that complexity? And over time, it snowballed and people went, yeah, why do I have Exchange on premises? And VDI, I feel we will soon go exactly the same way. Why have all that complexity of your VDI environment running on your on-premises infrastructure, where you can spin it up on the cloud and make it someone else's problem, to be fair? And ultimately, yeah, IO-intensive applications. We said about enterprise applications running on premises, giving me that predictable performance across there. But there are sometimes those IO-intensive applications which we're only going to see the benefit from running on a cloud platform, because a cloud platform throws resource at my environment. Now, to give you an idea, or a bit of an architectural dive into this, what this potentially looks like, and also some use cases on top of that as well. You could solely run just Nutanix on AWS, or in this case, on-prem to AWS. So in this case, we're showing you that really where we've got that Nutanix wrapper around it, sitting on the bare metal piece of AWS, and then leveraging, as I said before, some of the underlying services, in this case, the S3 storage, but then connected up via your customer gateway back to your corporate data center to allow you to do that replication. And for the eagle-eyed of you, when I was going through the demonstration, you may have seen in the drop-down, you've got data protection built into the platform as well. So we can do that. And in those cases, something to say too, before I forget, we're running our own hypervisor on AWS, so you don't have a hypervisor cost. Now, if that you're suddenly thinking, hold on a second, I've got ESXi, this is not going to fly for me. Well, Nutanix for a long time have had this ability and agility to have ESXi running on one Nutanix cluster, replicated to another Nutanix cluster, running AHV. Okay, so again, it is all about the choice, and even in those cases, you can stick with the hypervisor you know, and then leverage Nutanix's hypervisor running on AWS. Alternatively, we could just look at this purely solely running on AWS. Maybe you want a test and dev environment, just spin up a small environment, get access to it, run your workloads on there, because again, I don't want to impact my on-premises infrastructure around there. These developers, you know, they can be a little bit rogue in what they do sometimes. Well, in those cases, allow them to run it on there. You've got the security that's built into Nutanix. You've got your own security that you're able to do around ring fencing it, because it's not some shadow IT that I was talking about earlier. And then in turn, either completely destroy that cluster or even hibernate it. Or maybe you want to run this between two AWS regions across there too. Okay, so setting up those availability zones that I spoke about earlier, where people sometimes forget about or have to. The cloud's redundant, but I also have to build redundancy into the workload deployed on the cloud across there. Well, in this case, yeah, you want maybe those separate data centers sitting in two separate availability zones, and therefore doing that communication effectively within AWS itself, and me accessing it through the internet gateway too there. That gives you some ideas about the deployment models as well, but then also to feature a little bit on what happens in a deployment side of things. That means that really how we build that resiliency on the platform. Mark mentioned this a little bit as well. We start with effectively 3 nodes. We can run on 1 node, and I'll show you that in a demonstration in a minute. But in those cases where we're looking at multiple nodes, or rather the way we use cloud formation to do the deployment on AWS means that we put each of these hosts in separate partitions. So in these cases where I've got all these different hosts within those, if I lose partition 1, well, I'm able to recover the storage and recover the workloads on the other hosts in the other partitions. We see that a little bit here where we're talking about our replication factor, where we write a block of data local to the VM and copy it somewhere else within that cluster. And this also means that if at any stage, say, I don't know, that particular host 1 were to go offline, something's happened in the AWS data center or something's happened with the hypervisor side of things, whatever, it goes offline. In those cases, the cluster environment is smart enough to know that that host has gone offline. Let me eject it from the cluster, spin a new host up on another partition within the AWS region, and bring that into the cluster. So it seamlessly heals itself. We've got a construct of that, to be fair, on the on-premises piece, but sadly we can't just spin up another host easily within an on-premise data center. But again, really about that, you know, where you build resiliency into platform now, where your operations team are doing some tiering around the platform too, well, in those cases, that's all forgotten with Nutanix because the software handles that for you. A bit more around that connectivity piece though, how we connect up to that VPC. Well, that's down to you, okay? Lots of different ways to connect around here, whatever it may be, your own VPC, direct connect as it may be, or your own VPN across there too, and connects up to that environment. Keep it simple. Ultimately, it's just another data center, and then also leveraging a native network that's already built into those two. So again, we at Nutanix are not making any requirements on you to say, oh, no, you can only connect up this way. No, that's not fair. That removes the agility that is enticing again about the public cloud. So we allow you to do that connectivity in whichever way you like around it. It is truly, as Mark said, and we said a bit earlier on, all about your choice as the customer. It's not down to me or the Nutanix business to make that choice for you. We give you that choice around it. To summarize as well, a bit about our architecture too. We've got that Prism infrastructure sitting across these two platforms. Okay, I showed you Prism on the on-premises solution, but it also sits on the AWS solution. I'll have a look at that in a second. Deploying the environment is simple enough through a console. Just put some information in it. We'll go ahead and do a cloud formation. And then you choose the connectivity across there. So with a few minutes left, because I know I'm keeping you away from beer, I do enough of these events and I keep people away from beer all the time, and that's really not my speciality. Let's have a quick look at back to the demo environment across here too, and show you what it looks like in regards to how a deployment is handled. Okay, so in this case, I'm connected up to a console.nutanix.com, which allows me to do a cloud formation piece. I've already deployed this cluster here, but just really quickly, for me to go ahead and create a cluster, well, give that cluster a name. I'm going to call it a name. Choose my cloud provider across there. Select the account. In this case, my account's already put in here. This is my AWS account, so my VPC in here. Select the region I'm going to deploy it in. Set up the networking. In this case, I'm going to go with one there, but I could create my own. So this is the subnets which will be available in there. And then if I click on next, I can now configure it. Now, one thing I haven't shown you is what hardware is available in each of these environments, but ultimately I've got some hardware here with some CPU, some RAM and some disks. I can then go ahead, choose a number of hosts and a redundancy factor across here. And then ultimately at this point, as well as open up access to Prism, ultimately go ahead, click on next and go and deploy that environment. Now, as I said, let's close that off because I'm rich at the time. I've already got this cluster deployed on here, and you can see sits in this region here. I've got these pieces around here. I can even now go to that Prism element infrastructure, which I've got open here, but just to show you, not that classic, here's one I created earlier, but here is one I created earlier. And then I can log into this Prism environment, as long as I've remembered password wrong, and it looks the same as what I showed you right at the start of my presentation. It's exactly the same. We can see we've got some performance going on here. In this case, though, we've only got one host, and it's critical because it doesn't have any resiliency itself. But that was my choice, and we do warn you about that when we're deploying a single node environment. But again, if I come to the hardware view here, we can see from the diagram side of things that there is my nodes and its disks sitting within my VPC. And again, I get the analytical information about the host as well as the disk performance across here too. And as I only showed you the hardware and the VM, let's have a look at the VM piece too. So at least you can see, and the only VM on here is where our software sits in this controller VM. And you can see from within here, exactly the stuff I showed you before. It's exactly the same. So it goes back to my real point there. Why make it difficult for what you do on the cloud platform when Nutanix can make it really simple for you to have that consistent tooling, consistent operational excellence when you go and move out to the public cloud if it's so desirable. To show you as well a little bit about the complexity, and I really still get a bit flummoxed with AWS itself. I've got my AWS VPC. I'm connected up here. That's my account up there. And you can see there is my cluster sitting within this EC2 instance. Okay, so really, what can I do around it? I can do some bits and pieces. I'm not massively familiar with AWS in those regards, but ultimately that's what it looked like. So I've quickly shown you that through a console, I can do the deployment of the infrastructure. I can manage it the same as I did on my on-premises. And if I really wanted to, I can even look at it in the background for that AWS integration of those other services. If all of that has been quite enticing to you and it's something that interests you, have a look at Nutanix Test Drive. So we have an environment here that you can just sign up to, work account, get 4 hours to test drive all of these different components, build a private cloud, build a hybrid cloud infrastructure as well. So really get to see how that formation works and how you can manage cross management across each of those as well. And obviously, yeah, reach out to the guys at Bechtle too, because they're a great partner for those kind of demonstrations to help you really understand where this would all fit in. To close off, we've spoken a lot about AWS, and I also spoke a lot about there's other cloud platforms out there. Well, we're currently in early access for Azure, so soon, next year, early next year, Azure will be possible as a cloud platform, and we're also working through it with GCP at the moment. So those big three providers will all ultimately have Nutanix running on their platform too. With that being said, thank you very much. I hope you found that informative and useful. I'm going to hand over to Ben now in Beavertown. I hope you've all got your snacks and your beer at the ready across there as well. Thanks for that.
Grant, thanks for that demonstration, and thanks as well to Mark for the intro in terms of Lenovo. Hope you've all enjoyed that. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to a Bechtle account manager. If you want any demos, more than happy to give them. Thank you very much.